And these nations are Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. They have clubbed their militaries and called them the United Force of the Alliance of Sahel States.
In late December 2025, 3 West African countries that have recently broken away from traditional alliances met behind closed doors in Bamako. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger now operate under a joint bloc known as the Alliance of Sahel States, a security and political alliance formed after military takeovers, sanctions, and growing hostility with Western powers. During this meeting, something important changed. Burkina Faso's military leader, Ibrahim Traoré, was appointed the new chairman of the alliance, taking over the rotating position from Mali's leader. But the appointment itself was not what drew attention. What followed did. Instead of outlining policy or celebrating unity, Traoré issued a stark warning. He said West Africa was heading toward a dangerous phase. But what is he talking about? Let's find out. On 23 December 2025, leaders from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger gathered in Bamako for what was officially described as the second ordinary session of the College of Heads of State of the Alliance of Sahel States. On the surface, it looked routine. A closed-door summit, tight security. Carefully worded communiques are expected at the end. But the sequence of events inside the room mattered more than the agenda. Before any formal announcement was made, before the rotating chairmanship was even mentioned, Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traoré, took the floor. And he did not speak like a man waiting for a title. He spoke like someone delivering an alert. Traoré warned that West Africa was approaching a phase of severe instability. He did not describe it as accidental, cyclical, or unfortunate. He called it deliberate, planned, engineered. He gave it a name: Black Winter. In his framing, this was not simply about insurgency or insecurity. It was about a coordinated effort to keep the Sahel weak, fragmented, and permanently dependent. Militant violence, he suggested, was not just a security failure, it was a tool. A method used by external powers to exhaust states that refuse alignment, drain their resources, and turn their populations against their own governments. What made the moment striking was not just the content, but the timing. Traoré issued this warning before any leadership change was announced, before protocol, before applause, as if the message mattered more than the position. Only after this warning did the summit move forward with its formal proceedings. Only then was it announced that the rotating chairmanship of the AES had officially passed from Mali's leader, Assimi Goïta, to Traoré himself. The order was revealing. This was not a leader stepping into office and then shaping the narrative. The narrative came first. The chairmanship followed. The AES is not a symbolic organization. It was formed after 3 military-led governments broke with traditional security arrangements, rejected Western military presence, and faced sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and isolation. Its leaders view the alliance as a survival mechanism, not a public relations project. So when Traoré spoke of a coming Black Winter, he was not speaking as a commentator. He was speaking as someone about to assume responsibility for the bloc's direction. And his message was clear. The Sahel is not entering a period of negotiation. It is entering a period of pressure. When Ibrahim Traoré spoke of a coming Black Winter, he first pointed outward. He accused imperialist powers of deliberately maintaining instability across the Sahel. According to him, insurgency in the region is not simply a security failure or a local problem that spiraled out of control. It is managed pressure. Armed groups are funded, redirected, and kept alive to weaken governments that refuse alignment, refuse foreign military tutelage, or attempt to take back control of resources. In this framing, the violence serves a purpose. It drains national budgets. It overwhelms security forces. It creates humanitarian crises that justify external interference. Most importantly, it erodes public confidence until populations begin to doubt their own states. Traoré's message was blunt. Chaos is profitable to those who do not live in it. But then his focus shifted, sharply. Traoré did not stop at foreign actors. He accused African leaders themselves of playing a role in this destabilization. Without naming countries or individuals, he described certain heads of state as cowardly, saying they actively undermine regional security initiatives and weaken joint Sahelian forces. Not by opposing them openly, but by quietly refusing cooperation, spreading doubt, and amplifying narratives that delegitimize AES governments. This accusation mattered more than any reference to imperialism because it reframed the crisis. It suggested that the Sahel's problem is not only foreign interference, but internal sabotage. Leaders who publicly speak of sovereignty, yet privately benefit from a weakened Sahel. Governments that prefer instability next door if it keeps attention away from their own fragility. In other words, Traoré was saying that the Sahel is surrounded not just by pressure, but by complicity. This was a dangerous line to cross. By making it, Traoré signaled that the AES is no longer neutral in Africa's internal political divisions. The alliance is choosing sides openly. It is declaring that some governments are part of the problem, not partners in the solution. The implication was clear. The AES does not expect solidarity from the continent as a whole. It expects resistance, isolation, pushback, and possibly retaliation, diplomatic, economic, or informational. That realization explains why Traoré's tone was not conciliatory. He was not trying to win approval. He was preparing his audience and his own bloc for sustained pressure from multiple directions at once. By the time he finished this part of his speech, one thing was undeniable. This was not a warning about insecurity alone. It was a warning about alignment, loyalty, and who stands where when the pressure intensifies. Which raised the next unavoidable question. If the threat comes from both outside the region and within Africa itself, what strategy did Traoré say the Sahel must adopt to survive what he called the coming Black Winter? Traoré did not present options. He presented a verdict. After laying out what he described as a coordinated effort to destabilize the Sahel, aided both by foreign powers and by complicit African leaders, Ibrahim Traoré made his central argument clear. Neutrality is no longer possible. In his view, the region has reached a point where hesitation itself has become a liability. He framed the situation in stark terms. Countries in the Sahel, he said, either bind themselves together permanently or accept gradual subjugation. Not through invasion, but through pressure, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, financial strangulation, and unending insecurity. Fragmentation, he argued, makes each state easier to break. Unity raises the cost of interference. This was not rhetoric aimed at rallying crowds. It was directed at decision-makers. Traoré was essentially saying that the old strategy, balancing between partners, maintaining ambiguity, and avoiding confrontation, no longer works in the current environment. The pressure has become structural. It does not disappear when governments comply partially. It only pauses. What made this position notable was its lack of revolutionary romanticism. Traoré did not call for chaos, mass mobilization, or reckless defiance. In fact, he explicitly warned against internal violence and uncontrolled reactions. His emphasis was on discipline, coordination, and long-term endurance. Resistance in his framing must be controlled, or it collapses into self-destruction. This distinction mattered. It showed that the AES leadership is not seeking escalation for its own sake. It is preparing for a prolonged contest in which survival depends on institutional strength rather than emotion. Traoré's warning was not about dramatic confrontation. It was about avoiding slow suffocation. He also made clear that unity was not merely symbolic. Shared speeches and joint statements, he implied, are useless if states continue to act alone when pressure is applied. Real unity requires shared risk. It requires collective responses to sanctions, coordinated messaging when narratives turn hostile, and mutual defense when one member is targeted. This is where the meaning of the AES chairmanship became sharper. Traoré was not positioning himself as a spokesperson. He was signaling that under his watch, the alliance would treat attacks on one member as pressure on all three. Isolation would be resisted collectively, not absorbed individually. By this point in the summit, the tone had shifted decisively. What began as a warning about instability had become a declaration of posture. The AES was no longer presenting itself as a temporary reaction to coups and sanctions. It was presenting itself as a long-term political bloc, prepared to endure friction with powerful external actors. Yet one critical issue remained unresolved. Warnings and posture mean little without mechanisms. Unity fails if it is not backed by systems that can enforce it militarily, diplomatically, and economically. That question was about to be addressed. So, after Traoré defined the choice as unity or subjugation, What concrete structures did the AES leaders propose to make unity operational rather than symbolic? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. The answer came not from Traoré, but from Niger. After the warnings, the accusations, and the hard framing of unity versus subjugation, Niger's leader, Abdourahmane Tiani, shifted the discussion from posture to mechanics. If the AES was going to survive pressure, he made clear it could not rely on speeches or shared anger. It needed systems that would hold under stress. He outlined 3 concrete pillars already being built inside the Alliance of Sahel states. The first was a unified defense force under integrated command. This was not about symbolic joint exercises or intelligence sharing. It was about operational integration. One security space, one strategic outlook. One understanding is that borders between member states would no longer function as weak seams for militant groups or external manipulation. An attack in northern Mali in this model is not Mali's problem alone. It is an AES problem. The second pillar was coordinated diplomacy. Tiani was explicit that the days of negotiating separately were over. When pressure comes, sanctions, legal threats, diplomatic isolation, it comes to individual states. The response, he argued, must come from the bloc. One position, one voice, one line of messaging. Fragmented diplomacy had made Sahelian states easy to corner. Unified diplomacy raises the cost of coercion. The third pillar went even deeper, a confederal investment bank. This was not framed as a development project, but as a sovereignty tool. Tiani acknowledged openly that external funding has long come with conditions, political, economic, and strategic. Reducing dependence on foreign donors, he argued, is essential if the AES wants real autonomy. Without financial instruments of its own, unity remains rhetorical. Together, these 3 pillars revealed something important. The AES is not improvising. It is deliberately detaching itself from structures it no longer trusts, foreign security umbrellas, donor-driven development, and bilateral diplomacy shaped by unequal leverage. But Tiani also acknowledged a problem that soldiers and banks alone cannot solve. Even the strongest security coordination collapses if the public loses trust. Even the most disciplined alliance fails if populations are convinced their governments are illegitimate, criminal, or doomed. And this, he suggested, is where the pressure has increasingly shifted. That is why the summit did something unusual. Alongside defense and finance, it formally recognized information as a strategic domain. Ministers were instructed to counter what the bloc described as negative information campaigns, narratives designed to delegitimize AES governments, demoralize populations, and isolate the alliance internationally. This was a quiet but decisive move. It meant the AES now views media pressure, online narratives, and international framing not as public relations issues, but as security threats. And that raised the next question the summit could no longer avoid. If information itself has become a battlefield, what happens when that battle moves from headlines into courtrooms and contracts? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. By the time the leaders reached this point in the summit, one conclusion had already settled in the room. Military coordination and financial independence would not be enough. Even the most unified defense force can be neutralized if public confidence collapses. Even the strongest alliance becomes fragile if its legitimacy is constantly questioned. That is why the Alliance of Sahel states treated information as a security issue, not a communications problem. The leaders spoke openly about negative information campaigns, a phrase that sounds technical but points to something very specific. They were referring to sustained narratives portraying AES governments as illegitimate, incompetent, isolated, or criminal. Narratives that circulate through international media, policy reports, social platforms, and diplomatic briefings. Narratives that quietly prepare the ground for sanctions, legal pressure, and external intervention. From the AES perspective, this information pressure follows a familiar pattern. First, governments are framed as unstable or unlawful. Then their actions are portrayed as violations rather than sovereign decisions. Public opinion abroad hardens, investors pull back, allies hesitate. Finally, punitive measures appear justified. What makes this strategy effective is that it does not require troops or bombs. It works slowly. It erodes confidence inside the country and credibility outside it. Over time, citizens begin to question whether resistance is worth the cost. That moment, when people lose faith, is when states collapse without being conquered. The AES leadership was clear. This is not accidental, it is coordinated. That is why the summit instructed ministers to actively counter these narratives, not with slogans, but with coordinated messaging, shared framing, and rapid responses. The goal is not to convince everyone. It is to prevent isolation from becoming normalized, to keep doubt from becoming consensus. But information pressure does not exist on its own. It often prepares the ground for something more tangible. And that shift was already underway. As the summit discussions continued, the leaders pointed to a case that, in their view, perfectly illustrated how narrative warfare transitions into legal and economic coercion. A case that moved the fight from newsrooms and think tanks into courtrooms. A case involving contracts signed decades ago, resources extracted quietly, and a former colonial power unwilling to accept a loss of control. This was the moment when abstract talk about imperialism stopped being theoretical. Because when legitimacy is questioned long enough, the next step is often legal confrontation. Lawsuits framed as neutral, but aimed at restoring leverage, not through soldiers, but through judges, not through sanctions, but through property claims. For the AES leaders, this was no coincidence. They argued that once a state reasserts control over its resources, information pressure intensifies, and once that pressure fails, legal instruments are deployed to claw back influence. That realization reframed the entire discussion. The question was no longer whether the Sahel was under pressure. That was settled. The real question became far more specific and far more dangerous. What happens when the struggle for sovereignty leaves the battlefield of words and enters the courtroom, backed by powerful states and global corporations? It entered the courtroom the moment Niger touched uranium. The case that unified the alliance of Sahel states was not symbolic, and it was not accidental. France's state-linked nuclear company Orano filed a complaint in a Paris court accusing Niger's authorities of unlawfully seizing 1,000 tons of processed uranium, known as yellowcake, from former mining sites. From a legal standpoint, Orano framed it as theft. From the AES perspective, it was something else entirely. To the Sahelian leaders, this lawsuit represented the next phase of pressure. Resource control enforced through foreign courts after political influence had collapsed on the ground. No troops, no sanctions announced up front. Just law, contracts, and claims, backed by a powerful state, and decades-old agreements signed under unequal conditions. The AES communiqué did not mince words. The leaders described the case as judicial harassment, arguing that it was a deliberate attempt to maintain monopoly control over Niger's natural resources. In their view, when military presence became untenable and political leverage faded, legal mechanisms were activated to recover what influence could no longer be imposed directly. This is why the uranium case mattered far beyond Niger. If Orano succeeds, the precedent is clear. African states may reclaim sovereignty in theory, but not in practice. Any attempt to assert control over strategic resources can be challenged abroad, judged elsewhere, and potentially reversed through financial penalties or asset seizures. Sovereignty becomes conditional, permitted only if it aligns with external interests. That is why the AES reacted collectively, not with silence, not with private diplomacy, with public condemnation and unified messaging. The bloc framed the case as an attack not on Niger alone, but on the principle that African states can control what lies beneath their own soil. This moment also explained why Ibrahim Traoré's chairmanship mattered. His warnings in Bamako were no longer abstract. Under his leadership, the AES is positioning itself to confront pressure on every front simultaneously: military, diplomatic, informational, and legal. The alliance is no longer just resisting instability. It is resisting reversal, the attempt to roll back decisions already made, contracts already rejected, and power already reclaimed. But this path carries consequences. Legal battles drain resources. Diplomatic friction deepens isolation. Financial systems remain hostile. And the more aggressively the AES asserts sovereignty, the more pressure it is likely to face. The Sahel now stands in a place few regions choose deliberately: open confrontation with entrenched global systems. And that leaves one final question, not rhetorical, not dramatic, but unavoidable. Can the alliance of Sahel states sustain this level of resistance long enough to turn defiance into a new normal? Let us know in the comments section. Will the weight of legal, economic, and diplomatic pressure force the Sahel back into the very system it is trying to escape? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.